Welcome to Warping Fist.
During E3 2016, Insomniac revealed Marvel's Spider-Man, a new AAA Spider-Man experience that came after months of speculation. After years of receiving mediocre Spider-Man tie-in games, this new experience had the potential to not only be great, but it could also rival some of the best Spider-Man games in years. Developers Insomniac took it upon themselves to not only respect the world and mythos of the character, but they also sought to create an amazing gaming experience for fans and gamers alike. It's safe to say that Insomniac's ambitions and hard work paid off immensely. With the highly anticipated Spider-Man 2 releasing this year, let's take a look at the early development of Marvel's Spider-Man to see how Insomniac crafted one of the greatest Spider-Man games of all time.
Not so fast, Electro. Cause Spider-Man's back, and you'll need more than the city's power supply to take on Spidey's ice and taser webbing, stellar new fighting combos, and 19 killer Spidey suits, all with different powers.
For years, Activision held the publishing rights for Spider-Man video games, and they've produced some of the most acclaimed and iconic Spider-Man games in history. Games such as Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, Ultimate Spider-Man, Web of Shadows, movie tie-in games, and a series of other Spider-Man games over the years. The positives of having Activision as a publisher is that 1. We see Spider-Man games more frequently, at least one every 1 to 2 years. 2nd is that these games were incredibly unique from each other, offering players diverse experiences with each game. However, the cons often outweighed the pros, as more often than not, these games were mediocre or just downright bad. Not even the occasional good games could save the reputation of Spider-Man in gaming. This flip-flopping critical reception can often be due to the time constraints each developer faced, especially when it came to the movie tie-in games, as they were forced to follow a release schedule, leading to the rushing of production. Jay Ong, the senior vice president of Marvel Games, understood this fact very well, as he would state in an interview with The Verge that tie-in games were often the recipe for subpar products, and that they wanted to move away from the inconsistent quality of the past. Understanding the issues underlining most of their games, Jay Ong, his team, and the senior execs at Marvel devised a new gaming strategy for Marvel games moving forward, a strategy which prioritized working with the best game developers in the world, developers who shared the same grand ambitions and drive to push Marvel games to new heights. Insomniac were one of these developers Marvel would approach. Insomniac were mostly known as a company that made entertaining platformers like Ratchet & Clank and the Spyro series. However, they were also known for other games like Resistance and Sunset Overdrive, showing that the company was incredibly versatile with the types of games they made. This also showed that they were capable of creating many fun and diverse types of experiences, most of which became very popular within the gaming community. Insomniac were evidently a perfect choice to handle a superhero game. When Sony Entertainment's Connie Booth approached Ted Price about the opportunity to helm one of Marvel's IPs, Price was not sure how to feel at first, because Insomniac had never developed a pre-existing IP before. However, once he presented the opportunity to other developers, Insomniac was ecstatic about the opportunity, and after a bit of consideration, they chose Spider-Man as the character they wanted to tackle. Insomniac began work on a new Spider-Man game, and they had the difficult task of formulating and envisioning a brand new universe for the character. Unlike most Spider-Man stories nowadays, Insomniac wanted to craft a story that focused on an older Spider-Man, one that has been active for many years. This is because Insomniac wanted to show Spider-Man at his prime in order to both enhance the gameplay and challenge the character with higher stakes. The writing team would consult with many Marvel writers in order to help them craft this brand new story. And once their ideal narrative was finally put together, they would begin developing the visual look of the game. The visual development of Marvel's Spider-Man was one of the most important to cement the identity of Insomniac's Spider-Man universe. This is especially true when it comes to the character designs, as you want the fans to instantly associate a design with your iteration of the universe. Insomniac and the artists on board understood this very well and would begin putting together many amazing pieces of concept art. Artist Julien Renaud had one of the best and most unique visual artworks for Spider-Man I've ever seen. The world is incredibly vibrant and pops with color, almost appearing like a painting had come to life. However, later concepts of the world would embrace something a lot more grounded and tame, which is equally valid. Of course, the world of Marvel's Spider-Man is only a backdrop to host Spider-Man's colorful cast of characters, with the most important being Spider-Man himself. So how did Insomniac approach this version of the character and ultimately cement their design in the hearts of fans everywhere? When designing Spider-Man's suit, Insomniac wanted to pay homage to the character's original comic appearance, especially with the way Ditko and John Romita Sr. illustrated his costume. However, they also wanted to modernize his suit for the sake of practicality, as they wanted to create a design that a young adult today would reasonably make. They looked at real-life attire, like athletic gear, to help craft the functionality of this new suit. The blue sections were flexible and were meant for movement. The red sections were much tougher and placed where Spider-Man wanted protection, and the white sections offered the most defense, placed in vital areas like his chest and his knuckles. All these elements come together to craft one of the most visually distinct Spider-Man designs on screen. However, it took quite a while to arrive at this final look. Julien Renaud created some of the earliest iterations of Spider-Man's advanced suit, and when you look at the design, you see a ton of interesting design elements that make his suit stick out. This Spider-Man costume almost looks like a work of abstract art, with how certain elements come together. The eyes are angular and have a piercing blue glow, indicating how this mask is very technological. The blue sections cut through the red sections as if they were tendrils, almost wrapping around Spider-Man's body. The most interesting element of this suit is how the webbing and the spider logo are golden, almost having Spider-Man's suit look a lot more expensive. These golden webs are definitely one of the most interesting design choices I've ever seen in a Spider-Man suit, and in my opinion, they are a welcome addition. Eventually, Insomniac began experimenting with other alternate designs for Spider-Man, and these ones began to look a lot closer to the final suit design. However, one major difference you'll notice with these concepts is just how much darker the suit is. The colors are a lot more muted and dark, and the eyes are incredibly sharp, and the placement of the red and blue are very creative and unique. Even the spider logo is black, emphasizing how this suit is a lot darker. This version of the advanced suit really emphasizes how it's supposed to be a lot more protective, tactical, and athletic, especially when you see just how bulky it appears. Now, among these designs, this one must have been the most popular because it was later converted into a 3D model, which in turn became this image you see here. This design must have been highly considered, as you can see it being used in another illustration where Spider-Man overlooks New York, and another concept where Spider-Man is chasing a rampaging truck. In these concepts, you'll notice that Spider-Man's suit looks a lot closer to the final design. However, you'll notice two major differences when it comes to the eyes, which are now a lot sharper, and the web pattern, which is not only white, but it's also visibly raised, which helps it pop out even more. In later concepts, we see this design altered slightly, such as in this one, which not only gives Spider-Man sharper eyes, but the webbing is once again raised. However, one major difference is that the webbing seems more like an imprint sewn onto the suit, instead of a black line drawn onto it, which is a very unique way to approach the design. The texture of the suit also looks quite different when compared to the final look. It's very clear that this iteration of the suit was meant to look a bit more DIY and put together. Eventually, after a bit more tweaks, these concepts would finally evolve into the advanced suit we know and love. Besides Spider-Man, his robes gallery also went through significant alterations during the conceptual phases. Dr. Octopus is the villain that goes through the most design alterations, mostly related to his appearance and tentacles. The elements that go through the most changes is his tentacles. Now in the final product, Dr. Octopus's tentacles are black with sharp and glowing yellow mandibles on each end. However, when they were first developing the look of the arms, they had to go through many different looks. Now there's two types of tentacle designs the artist played with. Something a lot more bulky and deadly at the same time, and something a lot more fluid, thin, and fast moving. Now when it comes to these bulky designs, they are a lot more accurate to Dr. Octopus's arms in the comics. These arms are so bulky that it looks like it's weighing down Dr. Octopus. In this design, the arms look much closer to what we see in the final product. However, you'll notice that the arms at the bottom are extremely thick, almost like they're supposed to be some kind of stump, similar to an elephant. A lot of these bulky designs also play around with the color of the tentacles. As you can see, a significant portion of it is painted yellow, giving off the vibe that it's just a prototype that's still in the works. One element that caught my attention the most is how the heads of the tentacles are not very solid. Instead, they appear as mini tendrils that change form into any shape. If you take a look at the other pieces of concept art, this tendril-like approach to Dr. Octopus becomes even more apparent. Now this concept takes this tendril-like approach to whole new levels. These tentacles look like something straight out of a horror sci-fi film. In fact, I would not even describe them as tentacles at all, but more like living wires that bend, stretch, and flow into different forms. Like how you can tie hair into braids, they can tangle themselves to create a more solid form, and with their sharp edges, they can pierce into any object efficiently. This is not one tentacle, but many that can act independently but coexist as one seamless entity and hive mind. Now, this is one of the most interesting approaches to Dr. Octopus's arms. However, I can see why Insomniac wanted to go for something a bit more traditional. Mr. Negative also went through many different designs before landing on the one we see in the final game. Now when you take a look at the concept art, it's very apparent that Mr. Negative looked a lot more like a gangster than a businessman. He looks a lot more intimidating and someone who would not really be running a homeless shelter. This gangster look from Mr. Negative must have been popular because it's present in another piece of concept art for the game. This concept depicts one of the many major sequences in the game. However, this time around, his negative form is a lot different. Instead of his black and white form, it looks a lot more biological. His skin turns pale as black veins also envelop his body, and his hands begin glowing as he focuses his negative energy for the next attack. This approach to Mr. Negative's design makes the negative form look a lot more like a disease that's threatening to take over his body. Now this gangster-like approach is of course very unique. However, we also receive other designs that play around with his appearance. These ones give him a plethora of different attires. Some are more classy, akin to his final look, while others are a lot more wild and experimented with his look, especially when you see this concept, which has Mr. Negative look extremely young, closer in age to Peter Parker. There were other pieces of concept art For other villains in the game, such as Electro, Scorpion, the Rhino, and Vulture, their designs are only slightly played around with, and they never really stray too far from what we see in the final game. One change that the villains have in common is just how much armor is on the respective character, either covering their whole bodies or only covering a portion of it, as we can see their skin poking out. There was also pieces of concept art from many of the side characters in the game, such as Mary Jane Watson, Norman Osborn, Aunt May, Miles Morales, and even Peter Parker. However, once again, they don't significantly stray from the looks we have in the final game, the only differences being their overall face. When Insomniac were first hired to develop a Spider-Man game, web swinging was the first feature they wanted to get right. After working on Sunset Overdrive, which also has a heavy emphasis on its traversal system, Insomniac clearly had what it took to create a fun web swinging experience. However, that does not mean that web swinging was an easy feature to develop, as there was a lot of problems they had to solve in order to make the web swinging fun, a process that took them almost 3 years to perfect. To analyze the problems Insomniac faced when developing the web swinging, we have to compare it to the previous king of the mechanic. For years, Treyarch's Spider-Man 2 had the best web swinging system in a Spider-Man game. The main reason why it was so beloved was due to the fact that the system was primarily physics-based. Webs actually stuck to buildings. Players had to carefully calculate their momentum, and there was a real risk with players hitting the ground if they timed their swing wrong. Once a player mastered the system, it was incredibly fun, as you could zip through the map at blinding speeds. However, there was one major problem. The system had a massive learning curve, and there was huge consequences to messing up your swing. All the momentum you gathered could be destroyed in an instant if you ever happened to crash into a building, which just ruined the fun of it. Sure, a physics-based system was great, but only when you managed to get it to work. But even then, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was fun either. When Insomniac were first developing their swinging system, they also based it off real-life physics. The webs could attach to buildings, just like Spider-Man 2, and there was a great sense of fluidity and movement once you nailed down the workings of the system. However, just like Spider-Man 2, there was one huge problem when it came to keeping that momentum and speed, as playtesters crashed into buildings constantly, which in turn ruined the speed they had just built up. Insomniac realized that a physics-based system was cool, however, it sacrificed one's enjoyment for realism. As a result of this major flaw, they began implementing new features that would make the swing system a lot funner. Instead of players having to judge the momentum and distance themselves, the game would instead automate many of the features to enhance a player's experience. This was done through what Insomniac called carrying momentum through transitions. Instead of running into a wall and losing your speed, Spider-Man would instantly transition into a wall run instead of face planting into the ground or awkwardly running on it while holding your webs. Spider-Man seemed to float while near the floor, ensuring that your speed would never be ruined. The game also makes sure that there's plenty of features to help players keep their initial momentum, such as web zipping towards different parts of the city and then launching off with a button press, how you can seamlessly transition from a wall run into a swing, or how you can quick turn on a wall run as well. The game also adds an expressive camera, helping Spider-Man to seem faster. All these features come together to ensure that a player enjoys their experience no matter their skill level. The mechanic may seem simple at first, but there's many ways to take advantage of it and do things you never thought possible. Marvel's Spider-Man has one of the most inventive combat systems in a superhero game, partially taking influence from Arkham's free flow system. This combat system very much incentivizes keeping your combo going. However, unlike Batman, Spider-Man is a lot more acrobatic. The fighting system in this game heavily relies upon improvisation and creativity from the player. It's a system that very much encourages the player to experiment and juggle between many combat combinations, gadgets, environmental takedowns, and suit powers, while also trying to maintain a constant flow. However, despite how creative this combat system is, it was a huge headache to put together. When they were first developing the combat system, they needed a way to manage just how many enemies attack the player at once. To manage this better, they altered the system to where only one enemy could attack at one time. Which enemy attacked you largely depended on the distance to the player and how long that bot has been waiting to attack. The problem with this approach is that enemies did not attack as often as they should have. One other problem was that the enemy could be avoided very easily due to Spider-Man's speed. Of course, a situation like this would not pop up very often. However, since Marvel Spider-Man's combat was all about quick movements and zipping across the room, this meant that enemies oftentimes did not attack you at all. This made the combat feel dead and boring. They fixed this by implementing a new system in which if an enemy chased Spider-Man for too long, a new enemy would attack you instead. This new enemy would be the closest one to Spider-Man. One other problem that arose was the problem of cheap hits. You see, when Spider-Man and an enemy attacked each other at the exact same time, a problem arose where the enemy would always interrupt Spider-Man's attacks, and as a result, the player would take damage. This was a very frustrating feature, so the developers tweaked it a bit to where Spider-Man would always hit the enemy first. Many different features were also cut from the combat. For example, when fighting the larger brute enemies, there was a quick time event that required players to button mash until the enemy was down. Other cut content included certain finishers that, although were not present in regular combat, was implemented during car chases. Insomniac played around with different features during early development, such as the UI, which early on looked a lot larger, more colorful, and distracting. Now this UI only represents one of the many the studio played around with, as you see another version of the UI during the E3 2017 showcase. There were other cut elements from Marvel Spider-Man during very early development, such as sequences we see in the trailer that were not present in the final game. However, the final product we received was amazing, and it's always nice to look back at the early development history to see how Insomniac crafted one of the greatest Spider-Man games to ever exist.